Good morning. I'm the Reverend Jacqueline Sheldon from St. Paul's Episcopal Church at 220 Valley Street in Willimantic, and you know I love being with you to talk about the gospel. With that being said, I want to just talk to you today about our special gospel reading, which is the prodigal son, the parable of the prodigal son, which is my favorite, one of my favorite parables in the scriptures. You know, we don't often talk about how difficult it is for us to be God's children. The turning and the returning, the pain of learning how much we are truly loved by God. It is a strong and difficult challenge, to be honest and open. The freedom that we're called to as children of God has to be built on an ever-growing confidence in how much God truly loves us and wants us to be exactly who we're meant to be, the very best for each of us individually. But how do we put our minds around the idea that God's love is always flowing to us and through us in every turn of our days? We aren't called to perform like puppets, but to live out of a confidence in God's love meeting us at every corner and turn in our lives to help us grow. But how are we to do that? How are we to be truly honest about our heart's desires? How are we to get the strength to risk and try and the courage to admit when we're wrong? It seems to me that at some level, God is the only one we can truly have these deepest conversations with, to admit our most heartfelt desires, to share our saddest senses of wrongdoings, to share our successes and our failures. God is the one, divine perfect love is the one that we must be open with, and recognize that our hearts will be broken open as we do this, so that we can share an authentic love of God in the world, because we feel an authentic love of God for ourselves. So this morning I pray that as we listen to the prodigal son, we'll have that sense of God's authentic love for us in Jesus' telling of this story. And so from Luke's Gospel, chapter 15, we hear, all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus, and the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So Jesus told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to the father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between the 2 boys. A few days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property on dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods of the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but I am dying of hunger?" Notice, the wealth of the father is not diminished by the son who takes half of his inheritance to spend as he wants, or by the famine. Everyone still has enough on the father's estate to eat and more. Then the son says, "I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.'" He clearly has some awareness of the father's generosity. It gives him the courage to go home to seek his mercy. And so he sets off and went to see his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. This scene has always moved me. While he was still far off, the father sees him. Here's the question. When the son makes the plan for what he will say to the father, is he scheming because he's hungry, or does he really mean what he's saying? How truly far off is he? This is not just about wasted time and resources. It's also about how absolutely ignorant the son is of how compassionate and loving the father truly is. Jesus does not say that the son had an epiphany and that he realized what he had done and went to straighten things out. Jesus says he was starving when he came to himself and said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but I'm dying of hunger?" Look how the Father teaches and heals the Son. Even before the Son can execute his plan, the Father runs to greet him, filled with compassion, and puts his arms around him and kisses him. See what words finally come out of the child's mouth. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." That's it. No request to be fed like the hired hands. Just a straight-out confession of his wrongdoings. And what does it mean to sin against heaven? Well, as far as I could look up, it means to disrespect the sovereignty of heaven, the almighty power and rule of God. So the Son says, as I just said a minute ago, "Father, I have sinned against heaven, and before you I am no longer worthy to be called your son." Jesus shows us that it is by the generous outpouring of God's love that the Son comes to truly realize what he has done and how he has rejected and judged the love of the Father. But the Father then says to the slaves, "Quick, bring out the robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put the ring on his fingers and the sandals on his feet." It is then that the Son regains his place with the symbols of acceptance of a long row of distinction, the ring of authority and the sandals of a son. For you see, slaves were usually barefoot. "And get the fatted calf," he calls, "and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, "Your brother has come home, and your father has killed a fatted calf, because he has got back safe and sound." Then the son became angry and refused to go in. Here Jesus shows us the raw emotion of the child who has been working to please his father and gain reward. Years of ignorance of the Father's compassionate generosity. And we see here the tenderness of the Father. The Father came out and began to plead with the Son. Jesus makes it sound like the Father doesn't even have a clue that the Son should have any problem with the situation. The Son, who has been working hard all this time, erupts in anger. He answers his Father, "Listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you. I have never disobeyed your command, yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him." The son's words are so raw and revealing. How hard he has worked and never sensed any reward was deserving of him. How heartbreaking it is to see how far away this son has been from the Father, even though he has worked with him all these years. Then the Father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found." Well, really, how lost was the older son? How afraid is he that there will not be enough and that everything is earned, even though in the wording of the story, Jesus makes it clear that the estate has lost nothing in the departure of the younger son, except the brother himself. How difficult is it to really grab hold of our own inheritance in the kingdom with our Father? How hard is it for us to believe that God loves us so unconditionally and so generously, each one of us truly in a special way that's just meant for us in particular. Each and every one of us is always coming home to that generous and compassionate love of God. It is when we allow ourselves to be as honest as we can be with God about our concerns and desires that He kisses us and welcomes us in over and over again throughout our whole lives. Where do you need to come home from today? Where are you doubting in the generosity of God's love? Where do you need to feel Him put His arms around you and kiss you? Go for it. Come home.
Nice. Well, the prodigal son was a forward child. His mind was not to obey. But after he left his father's house, he thought he had gone astray. And that's why I believe, go back home, I will go back home, 'cause I believe, go back home and be the servant of it all. Well, his father saw him coming, and he met him with a smile. He threw his arms around him. He said, "Now that is my darling child, and that is why I believe we can go back home and live. I will go back home and I will go back home and be the servant of the Lord." Father asked the prodigal, "Son, why you been gone so long? What made you so love the world and forget your happy home?" Well, the prodigal said, I really searched the world for true religion. No faith, no peace could I find, till I came to a little place called Bakersfield that eased my troubled mind. And that's why I will go back home. I will go back home as I believe. Go back and be the servant of the Lord. Well, I believe this, I believe I will go back home. I believe it, I will go back home. Yes, I believe I will go back home and be the son